Roger that. 5223, vector inbound. 22107, you are cleared to defend yourself. Number uniform, 67211. 106, reset Cap 5. 106, 110, reset Cap 5. Everybody out of burner. Please, 5 miles. Let's push it up.
My first permanent duty assignment was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is located in Dayton, Ohio. I remember I was stationed at my first assignment there on the base when in Area B was in Aeronautical Systems Division at Wright-Patterson. And my first assignment was the F-15 Systems Programming Office. And I was working at the F-15 SPO for a while. I was only there for maybe a couple of months before they sent me to another location there in Area B. Not because there was a problem, only because it's not uncommon for the Air Force to shift people around based on needs of, manpower needs, because there's always an influx of airmen coming into the base, airmen leaving, transferring from one area to the other. It's kind of like in the private sector when you're a business owner, and you have a total of 150 employees. Your business is growing. This department over here needs more people than this one over here, so you transfer a few people here and there, and then you hire more. It's kind of the same concept, right? So they've moved people around. Anyway, so one day I'm at the front counter. So on the floor that I'm on the first floor, but then there's a 2 or 3 floors in the building. So I'm at the front counter. It's similar to like you would think of similar to a post office, but not quite the same thing. It's kind of an L-shaped counter, and I was a clerk there, right? So my job's actually very simple, office-related stuff. What most people would find pretty boring. And I worked with another guy. His name was Airman Poole, and his first name was Ron. So Ron and I were just kind of chit-chatting, and we're pushing paper or doing whatever we were doing at the time. And this particular SPO, the F-15 SPO, was it's the purpose of it is to support the F-15 fighter. And when I say support, I'm not referring to the people who do this out on the flight line, who provide fuel and weapons. That's called the operational side. You have to have a administrative side of the real Air Force, which supports not only the air crews, the pilots, but also the people who are doing all the physical work out on the flight line. So it's a multi-phase kind of a thing. You have to have people over here doing all the paperwork and all the other stuff, and there's people over here doing the physical, and then there's the pilots that fly, and then you got the air traffic controllers, you got the other people who are, prepping the pilots, and it's a team effort. Anyway, so the purpose of the F-15 SPO was to support the F-15 program. Because you have to remember, this is the late 1970s. The F-15 had only been flight tested within the last 2 or 3 years prior to that. This is a brand new fighter. It was built, I believe, started flight testing somewhere between 74 and 76. So, I mean, this thing was still brand new in the inventory. And it was one of the hottest fighters at the time. They were also developing the F-16 Falcon at the time. And that was the newest fighter, way ahead of its time. Anyway, so we're standing there at the counter, right? We're doing our thing. And it's not uncommon for pilots to walk in because they're there to get briefings. They're the ones that are up there flying the fighter, and they're providing the people in the F-15 SPO the feedback of what's happening when you're up there flying, what kind of problems you're running into, let us know what that is. You know, on the support side, we're going to document that. We're going to contact the contractor. We're going to say, hey, look, McDonnell Douglas, you need to fix this. They fix it. They provide the fix. They notify the guys in the Air Force who handle the avionics in the cockpit and the engines and weapon systems and whatever we're trying to fix. The contractor provides the software updates. They let us know what we have to fix. They update the manuals. The work gets done on the flight line. The pilot climbs in the cockpit, flight tests it again, and then the cycle repeats again and again and again and again and again. They fly, they give us feedback, we fix it. They fly, they give us feedback, we fix it, that sort of thing. So in comes this pilot. There was two of them, actually. They were both wearing orange jumpsuits, and back then that's what they did. They wore orange jumpsuits. Okay. Again, we saw pilots all the time, so this is nothing new, right? But this time, however, the difference is one of the pilots I recognized. So they walk up to the counter, and I was just beside myself. I'm like, oh my God, you cannot be serious. So up walks to the counter, because they needed to know which briefing room to go to, right? They weren't familiar with the building. Must have been one of their first times there. And it was none other than the man himself, Chuck Yeager. And I smiled, and he looked at my name tag. He goes, oh, Airman Owens. You know where I can find such and such briefing room, whatever, blah, 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 we need, that sort of thing. And I said, yes, sir. I said, go down the hall, do this, do that, go into this door, give them directions. And I stuck my hand out just to say, just because I knew this was only going to last a few seconds and this would never happen again in my lifetime. I said, I just want to let you know, thank you for what you did. Thank you for serving in World War II. And thank you for breaking the sound barrier and changing the world. And that's exactly what I said to him. And he said, welcome to the Air Force, young man. And I will never forget that the rest of my days. That was pretty cool.
Well, it was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in ASD, or Aeronautical Systems Division. The second directorate I worked at, which is the one that followed right after the F-15 SPO, was the Systems Directorate. The Systems Directorate, it provides science and leading edge technology to define airman capabilities and vulnerabilities and effectiveness of the airmen and the technology that the airmen use to fight wars and that sort of thing, aircraft. They train warfighters. They help out to integrate operators in the field and weapon systems. They protect Air Force personnel and sustain aerospace operations. That's what the System Directorate does. It's a mix of things. The System Directorate is the one I was working at when I was offered the opportunity to work at the C-17 source selection, which is request for proposal, long before it ever flew. And of course, the Air Force Security Forces as well, along with the AIM-9 missile system. So it was a place where it supported a lot of other things. Think of it as a central hub of a wheel. So the System Directorate supported all the other directorates in ASD. Well, I was working in an Aeronautical Systems Division in Area B. I was involved with the C-17 source selection program in the early 80s. Now, this was
many, many years, long before the C-17 ever flew, ever left the ground, ever, before it was before they did flight testing. I worked with a lot of officers and DoD civilian employees during the source selection, where they would sit in a lot of meetings and discuss the particulars that the manufacturer or that the defense contractor provided them. And now my role in it, of course, was not really all that exciting. It was just a administrative capacity, but I did receive a commendation for it, and I had a lot of fun being involved with it. I learned some things that I didn't know about, the C-17 program that was okay for me to learn. But back in those days, it was really fun to kind of watch and listen and just be involved in it and learn things. So for me, it was really fun to be involved with that. As a young airman stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I was given a unique opportunity to serve in the Air Force Security Forces. My supervisor at the time, they called me into his office, and he was telling me about a program that was available where the security forces on the base where I was serving were running a special program for those who were interested, who had a clean record, were in good standing. Basically, were nines across the board on the Airman Performance Review reports, meaning that you've never done anything wrong, you stay out of trouble, you're a squared away airman, you go above and beyond, that kind of thing. They only want the best. So I took the opportunity to serve into the Air Force Security Forces, and it was a fantastic experience. I'm really glad I did that. It was a unique experience. Now, the training that I received was the same as what the security forces who do it full-time also receive. Now, the difference being that my service with the security forces was not permanent full-time for the rest of my career. It was for a specified length of time. As I recall, I believe it was 6 months to a year, and it wasn't necessarily 40 hours a week per se, but it was pretty intense at first going through the training, because you're trained on everything that any other security forces would need to know. You're trained on patrolling, you're trained on entry procedures for personnel entering the base and leaving the base. You're trained on weapons, you're trained on radios, you're trained on arresting techniques, cuffing someone, writing tickets, the same stuff that security forces go through, which included shooting at the range and that sort of thing. So I did serve on the Air Force Security Forces, and the one thing I want to say about the Air Force Security Forces is it very different from the Marines and the Army? Of course it is. We're not the Marines and the Army. We're not supposed to be like them. However, for those of you out there who may not know this, there is a unit called the Air Force Special Warfare Unit, and their training is very much like the Navy SEALs, and they are total badasses. So there is a unit that specializes in Spec Ops, Black Ops, that kind of thing. What I was involved in was more of the norm, if you want to call it that, the security forces. So I basically, a day in the life when I was serving in the security forces involved allowing people to either enter or not enter the base, checking their IDs, checking their cars, checking to make sure they have stickers on their cars, they were NCO or officer or DOD personnel, making sure that whoever's trying to get on the base who isn't supposed to be doesn't get on the base, right? It also involved working different shifts during the day. At night, also was required to be trained on providing security for the Air Force flight line. Now, there is a group of the Air Force Security Forces that specializes in flight line security. In flight line security, they are tasked with making sure that not only the entry points along the flight line are covered for those who are entering and exiting the entry points on flight lines, who are supposed to be there with their badges. They're also there to guard the billions of dollars in taxpayer assets. and they perform a vital role in the Air Force. One of the other things that I was also considered for while working at Wright-Patterson during my tenure there was the AIM-9 Sidewinder program. My supervisor talked with me about another opportunity. Say, hey, look, the AIM-9 Sidewinder program is looking for additional help. It's nothing special, just your normal, administrative capacity kind of support, but it might be kind of fun for you. Get away from your normal stuff for a while, and it's another notch in your belt, and that's something else you can put on your, your military experience resume, that kind of thing. And I highly recommended you to them. If you're interested, let me know. Well, I did take that assignment, and it was fun. I got to meet some really great officers and some really good civilians. One thing that some of you out there watching this might find interesting. Now, my grandkids probably won't care about this or even understand it, but the older folks might find it interesting, might get a kick out of it. When I was working the A9 Sidewinder program, back then, this was what people today would call ancient computing technology. They had a device called a mag card reader. Now, a mag card reader is a machine about the size of a copying machine. It's pretty big. And what it does is it processes data. It's essentially a computer, right? But here's the real kicker. Here's the fun part, right? They have cards that are about this long. Let's say maybe, I don't know, maybe 6 inches long or something, maybe that wide, kind of like that. And they have holes punched in them. And you take a stack of these and you sit them on the machine and you press some buttons and it feeds them in one at a time, and it's reading the holes that are punched in the cards. That's called a card punch reader. And those holes mean something to the machine. So it gets translated in the machine, and the machine says, oh, this is database information for AIM-9 Sidewinder, blah, 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 blah. So to a human being, they mean nothing. They're just cards with holes in them. But to the machine, it does mean something. That's ancient technology. That's what they were using at the time. Now, today, we would use something called SQL or Oracle database software. Back then, that was how you did it. And that data got input into a larger computer or a mainframe computer back in the day. Like I said, it was just administrative capacity. I didn't do anything special there, but it was another notch in my belt with my military career, and it was a lot of fun. Got a break from my normal stuff.
After serving in the AIM-9 Sidewinder program, I was given the opportunity to transfer to the F-16 Systems Programming Office. The reason why they wanted me to do that was because there was an opening, because there was a senior NCO who had left, who was retiring, and they had to fill the slot. So my supervisor knew that I had an interest in learning more about the F-16. It was still a very new fighter in the inventory, and I was interested. At the time I transferred to the F-16 SPO, I showed an interest in wanting to possibly retest on the ASVAB and then cross-train into another on the operational side of the Air Force. So it was a good fit for me to go and do that. Now, the F-16 SPO operates very similar to the F-15 Systems Programming Office. They support the entire F-16 program, very similar to the other one that I had talked about earlier on. My tenure there at the F-16 Systems Programming Office wasn't long per se. I'd say maybe a year, give or take. And by then I had already retested and showed some interest in wanting to cross-train into the operational side of the Air Force, which I will talk about in segment 3 or in part 3, which you do not want to miss. It's going to be really awesome.
When I was a little boy, I was at a carnival that my parents took me to, and they were giving rides in helicopters at the carnival. And now the helicopter at the time was the bubble canopy type that you saw on the TV show MASH. So that was my first time I ever left the Earth and was in experienced aviation at all.
Yeah, 312, 4. Push it up.
Years later, when I was a teenager, there was a friend of the family who worked for a newspaper, and he was an aerial photographer for a newspaper, and he took me and my family up flying. It was my first time in a fixed-wing, single-engine aircraft, and that was quite exciting for me. Little did I know, many years later, that I would serve in one of the most elite tactical fighter units in the Air Force.
Threat, southeast 65 miles.
Code 1, got SA-21, 21.
Stroke 3, defending SA-2. 190, 20. Get us an A Griffin. Stroke 3, check right, break right. Stroke 3, break right.